Have you ever been to a magic show? If you've been to one, you may have noticed how a magician can very skillfully make objects appear and disappear right in front of your eyes. The way a magician is able to do that is simply by playing with your attention. So if you're not paying a really close attention, you may miss important things unfolding right in front of your eyes. Now, you don't have to worry. I don't plan to pull any magic tricks on you today. But I want to bring to your attention something that makes me tick and that you may have been missing out on. Uber, Deliveroo, Airbnb, Upwork, and the list goes on. Platforms that have pioneered the so-called platform economy and that we are by now all too familiar with, if not accustomed to. I bet all of you have rented a place to a complete stranger or spent a night on a stranger's couch. I bet all of you have taken a ride with one of the ride-hailing apps or had a lazy afternoon and indulged into the convenience of ordering food via one of the food delivery apps. And if you've never hired a cleaner, a virtual assistant, a babysitter, or a dog sitter with a click of a button, I bet you at least thought of doing so. It's all around us, and it's incredibly convenient and efficient. But these platforms have also been heavily criticized for circumventing regulations, for creating a new class of low-income laborers, and for shifting risk to workers who are no longer entitled to the benefits the full-time employees enjoy. And as technologies continue to advance and new opportunities arise with artificial intelligence, we can expect to see platformization of many more sectors of the economy, from healthcare to public services. So I feel the time is ripe for us to take a moment and evaluate the status quo. So today, I want to show you that there is more to platforms than meets the eye. I want to share with you some of the findings from my research on the impact that these platforms are having on an army of workers that powers them. And I want to invite you to consider a different way of organizing our economic activities that can be promising a more fair value distribution. So what are the platforms really, and how did they manage to create a new world order? Platforms are essentially digital infrastructures that connect us to one another for exchange of goods and services. What makes them different and business than usual is their ability to grow extremely fast by leveraging the so-called network effects. Meaning, the more users you have on one side of the platform, the more attractive is the platform for users on the other side. The more Airbnb hosts join the platform, the more is the platform attractive for travelers, and the other way around. Platforms are also not capital intensive, which is how a company like Airbnb managed to become one of the largest hotel chains in the world without owning a single hotel, and Uber, one of the largest transport companies in the world, without owning a single vehicle. This shows us that in this new economy, different things count. And what counts is not the ability to create means of production, but the ability to create means of connection. And that's what these companies have mastered. They manage to leverage and to tap into the skills of the communities. And for making such exchanges possible, they take up to 25% cut from every transaction. Powering the wheel are sophisticated algorithms and an army of workers that can be mobilized on demand. So my colleagues and I wondered, how do workers respond to this new algorithmic powered way of organizing? And how is their well-being, in their own words, being affected? To find out, we took Uber as a case study and scraped the data from a popular forum, uberpeople.net, ending up with more than 36,000 posts of what drivers discuss with one another. And what we find is surprising. Namely, the workers' well-being, satisfaction with wages, and the way Uber treats them is highly dependent on local regulations. We took 12 largest US cities, plus London, and categorized them based on whether they're strongly or weakly regulated. In the former group, there are strict regulations imposed both on platform companies and on drivers. Platforms need to obtain a special license to be able to operate in the city, and drivers need to go through a lengthy process that can at times cost up to a few $1,000s. In the weakly regulated cities, on the other hand, the regulations are much more lenient for both platform companies and for drivers. Consequently, there are more platforms to choose from, and becoming a driver can be a matter of days. So what do we find? We find that in the strongly regulated cities, such as New York and London, drivers generally have a more positive sentiment towards Uber. They cooperate more with one another, and they want to help Uber to its end. They give one another tips about the best times and places to drive, or flag a big event happening in the city. But they go even further and organize physical meetups to be able to discuss how they can improve workings of Uber. Jim is an Uber driver from Chicago, and he writes on the forum. Driver partner meeting, Starbucks Monday, February 1st at 10 a.m. As I've said in a lot of posts, I think we need to meet face to face and start exploring ideas on how we can get our collective voices heard. How we do that is completely open to discussion. We all want to see Uber and Lyft succeed. They need to start accepting feedback from their most important asset, us. Please RSVP and Uber on. As this quote illustrates, in the strongly regulated cities, drivers essentially want to see Uber succeed. Why? Because they had to go through a lengthy and costly process to become a driver in the first place, so they're more dependent on Uber. Similarly, Uber has less drivers to choose from, so they're more dependent on drivers. So in these cities, where there are more rules and regulations, the mutual dependence between platform companies and workers is strengthened. In the weakly regulated cities, the story is quite different. In the cities like Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., drivers generally have a more negative sentiment towards Uber. They're less satisfied with their wages and less trustworthy towards the company in general. Mike is an Uber driver from Los Angeles, and he writes on the forum that their full-time drivers are living hand to mouth, at least to this extent. For some reason, I get this weird feeling that they think their drivers are still doing well, and that maybe they're just that much out of touch, even though it's more likely that they both know and just don't care. But part of me doesn't want to believe it. In these cities, we also see drivers less trustworthy towards the company. One driver, who I call Sylvia, believes that she doesn't get a fair share of her earnings ever since some of the passengers voluntarily told her how much they paid for the upfront ride. As she claims, what she gets does not seem to match what the passengers paid. Sylvia and Mike are among many Uber drivers who believe they're treated unfairly. So in these weakly regulated cities, Uber has more drivers to choose from, so they're less dependent on them. And it also seems like they have more leeway to implement their own rules, which can sometimes be a driver's disadvantage. But we also see drivers sometimes take self-initiatives and engage in activities that can be directly harmful for the company. For example, back in the day when Uber did not allow tips on the app, we saw drivers in these weakly regulated cities post signs in their cars, "Tips are great," encouraging others to give tips. One driver even bought a machine to be able to accept tips via credit cards for those that didn't have cash on them. So when there are less rules and regulations, the mutual dependence between platform companies and workers is weakened. So what this study shows us is not only that regulations can have a profound effect on workers' well-being, but the regulations can influence the power dynamics between platform companies and workers. But while it may seem to you that workers are just passive followers due to their relatively lower position of power, as we see, drivers and workers can, at times, take initiatives that can be beneficial or not for the company. But when such initiatives are taken beyond the boundaries of an organization, we get something that's going to blow your mind. Let me introduce you to platform cooperatives, an emerging organizational form in the platform economy. They resemble the mainstream platforms, but unlike them, they're owned and governed by users, workers, or both. The basic logic behind these platforms is that if a 15-year-old can build an app that connects us to one another, why wouldn't we, as users or workers, build our own apps and capture back the value? And this is happening. There are now more than 300 such initiatives around the globe. Driven by ideology and empowered by technology, they're determined to change the playing field. Stocksy is a stock photography website, but with a twist. It is owned by more than 1,000 artists. All artists participate in decision-making and in the matters that concern them all. At the end of the year, if the cooperative did well, artists get a proportional share. Fairbnb is a platform co-op version of Airbnb. They believe that while the industry giants brought many problems to local communities, such as rising housing prices, they can turn that into an opportunity. In particular, they have one host, one house policy, meaning that nobody can rent more than one property. And they promise to give back 50% of their platform fee to local community projects. And Partago is a car-sharing cooperative based in Belgium. It is owned by users who can purchase a vehicle and put it in a joint car fleet so that everyone can make use of it. All users participate in decision-making, and all the vehicles are electric. In this way, they hope to promote sustainable transport. It seems cool, doesn't it? The reason most of you have probably never heard of these platforms is because they're far from mainstream. Platform cooperatives often lack financial resources to be able to compete with mainstream platforms. Have you ever wondered why when Uber, Bolt, Cabify, or Didi showed up in your city, the ride costed only the equivalent of a few dollars? It's because these platforms subsidize prices to tip the market in their favor. Once they attain a big enough network of service suppliers and users, they bring the prices up. And platform cooperatives can simply not compete on those terms because they cannot attract enough financial investment. But I believe that there is something they can compete on, and that is their distinctive identity. There are people who are simply willing to consume differently, and to whom sustainability or conscious way of traveling is simply more appealing. Cooperatives have historically also tended to be more resilient to economic crises, and perhaps that's another feature they can bid. But even though platform cooperatives may never become mainstream, they serve as an important reminder that the platform economy, as we know it, is not given, but created. And while you may think of yourself just as customer of these services, we are essentially employers. We are calling these workers onto jobs and we are paying them. And our power lies in that. And if you ask me, I think that's pretty magical. At the beginning of this talk, I promised not to pull any magic on you. But I hope that this just did the trick. And that you've realized that there is more to platforms than meets the eye. And that there is a whole world behind, operating in parallel, hiding behind the obvious. And that you can, shall you try to, find your place in it. So the question is, are you paying attention? Thank you very much.